there's a way for artists to be able to build their own career on their own terms. And again, I'm going back to Daniel as an example because he said this and it really, really resonated with me. On-chain music provides the opportunity for something new in the music business, which is a quote, middle class artist. Okay, let that just sit for a second. Welcome to Decentralized Dawn, where lifelong friends Chicago and Disco navigate the ever-evolving crypto landscape. With genuine curiosity and a commitment to nuance as our North Star, we offer clear-eyed exploration. Our goal? To empower listeners with the tools and insights needed to flourish in this decentralized age.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. This is our second show, and I am, again, super excited for what we've got going today. I am Chicago, and over to my left is Disco.
Ahoy, I'm Disco, and I'm proud and happy to be here. I'm excited to go into the second maiden voyage of this Decentralized Dawn journey, and it's a topic that we're going to delve into that I have it's probably one of the more passionate topics of my life, and most of the people that I tend to connect with and gravitate towards in life kind of always have music as a central kind of connecting point. And that's why I'm really excited to kind of dig into this, because there's a lot of ways we can go with it, and I think we'll all kind of benefit from this conversation and the journey that we're about to embark on.
Well, yeah, and it's a second show, and the second show is always the most nerve-wracking. The first one's just like, I did it, and the second show, it's, oh, we're doing it again. So yeah, I mean, musically, Disco, we grew up together, and his influence on me has been massive. Some of my favorite bands, like Air, French band, Moon Safari is the album, Chemical Brothers. There's so many. He was a promoter back in the coast a long time ago, and he shared music with me. And before the show, I shared a cool story that his influence on me and my musical tastes, especially in my 20s, I got to pass on to my nephew, and he's taken electronic music and that kind of music down tempo to a whole nother level. So it's cool. Thank you for the influence and passing that to me, but passing it on to my nephew, it's just that the ripple effect is beautiful.
Well, I will say that it might be a crutch, but it's a truth in my life, which is if I'm ever in a conversation or meeting someone and I'm kind of, not to say I'm, antisocial, but I'm kind of filtering, like, am I going to be interested in investing some time with this person? I generally start with the question, what have you been listening to recently? And I like to, have conversations that's central, that, kind of central point is, what are they listening to? What do they like? Have they been to shows recently? And are they kind of, looking for that nectar? And generally the people that I tend to be quite tight with are open-minded to hearing about other types of music and what people are responding to. And I love getting turned on to new music. As you referenced, like when I first got out of college, I ended up starting a music promotion company, and it was based on that whole premise. I basically talked to tastemakers across the country and found out what songs and artists that they were into. And this is going to date me for sure, but we then took it from, it used to be a tip sheet that I would fax out overnight on Sunday nights. I had like get to this little place in Hollywood that I would fax it out.
You're dating yourself, sir. Be careful. Be careful.
I know. Well, back up. But I will, for a little bit of credibility, we did figure out a way to put it online. And that was one of the first kind of ways that people would discover music in that format, through websites and stuff like that. Really quick, I just wanted to say, there's a lot of different ways to look at on-chain music overall, different approaches we can take for this show. And we wanted to kind of have this discussion focus on the big picture and how this technology can disrupt what and fix really what is such an essential and valuable yet honestly broken industry. To prepare for this show, we did a lot of DYOR, and I wanted to thank some folks that helped me to gain some perspective and better understanding of the space and the opportunities and what's being built, and kind of also from the artist perspective. So first, I want to thank Coop. He does so much with this Invest in Music newsletter, and he's kind of all over the space, kind of really leading the way. So shout out to Coop for kind of helping me put some thoughts together. And then more from the artist perspective, Daniel Allen is certainly one of the true pioneers on the on-chain music space. And then I'm going to give a big shout out to Rio Cragen as well. I learned a lot for this conversation from listening to all these guys, specifically at a panel at Permissionless a couple weeks ago. And it really helped me kind of form some of the things I wanted to cover today. Also, a quick shout out to and thank you to, I want to say Pastrami. We'll make sure we tag it properly and, give him a follow in the show notes and everything like that. So we really, I think it's a really vibrant portion of kind of the crypto community, and, everyone's kind of rooting for the thing to go well. So just a little tee up there.
And everybody will be in the show notes. And yes, do give them a follow. Before I spend time with you, Disco, now that we know what we're going to be talking about today, I also kind of like to know the music that people listen to before I hang out with them a little longer. So give me your favorite thing you're listening to now and top 3 albums of all time. And yes, I did say albums. I don't listen to individual songs. I listen to an album from beginning to end.
I can't go specific to an artist right now, but I will say that I am in a massive Latin jazz phase.
Interesting.
I have been everything I can find from that perspective. Although there is an artist who I think I'm going to go see tomorrow night at a really cool venue. And that artist is Frank Moody, who just to let you know, full disclosure, I do have one of Frank Moody's NFTs. I got it, 6 months ago, and I love what they're doing. It's just an incredible vibe and sound. If we want to talk about top 3 albums,
I know it's almost impossible. Just throw some out. Top 50 would probably be easier for you than the top 3. Yeah. Just give me a couple.
All right, I'll give you Daft Punk Discovery is always going to be kind of leading the way. You might be able to see some posterage back there. I'm going to go with a little Verve Urban Hymns. That album just transports me to a whole different place. And so
you're saying the whole album's good?
Oh yeah. Everyone thought, it's Bittersweet Symphony's the jam, and that's all there is to it.
Okay.
Not the case. Maybe to round it out in a weird way. And again, I'm just, me well enough to know that this could be a 5-hour answer. So I'm trying to just kind of go, but I have started to spend more and more time recently with a classic, somewhat overlooked album called Physical Graffiti from Led Zeppelin.
Oh yeah. And In the Light, side B, or sorry, the second, I was going to say album. Yeah. The second album is just, that's where it gets transcendental and mellow. It's like starting with In the Light. That yes. I have an older brother and sister, so I got exposed to really good music when I was a kid. And when when they were gone, I would go into the room and spin that record, and I'd always put on side 2 In the Light. And there was just something otherworldly about that song. So can relate.
Yeah. It wasn't, it wasn't as heavy necessarily. They kind of found some tempos and grooves, and it was a really interesting evolution. For me, the album has to represent the evolution of the artist's trajectory, and their creativity. So I don't need to hear, a sophomore album that sounds like the first. That was, like we talked before about the second Beastie Boys album. The reason that resonated so much was that they took a big risk with that, with Paul's Boutique, and it sounded nothing like Licensed to Ill, but lo and behold, I think it was probably some of their best work. All right. You asked the question, it's going to boomerang back to you. So give me your top 3, and what are you listening to now?
While you were talking, I was prepared. I wrote it down. I'm not going to stall on this one. So I already mentioned them, but I have to say Disco introduced me to this band, but Air Moon Safari is the album. It's just, again, I don't have the words that Disco can use because I didn't write for the music industry, although I did work in the music and entertainment industry for over a decade, but I was on the suit business side. So when Disco and I were in our 20s and early 30s, I'm over here seemingly with the coolest job ever, and I'm looking at him who started a company, was on the street and really seeing and feeling what's coming out in the cutting edge music back when electronic music was in its infancy stage. So it would appear on paper that I had the cooler job, but in reality, I always took my cues from Disco. But I'm going to go Air Moon Safari, Ween chocolate and cheese. And this one,
Whoa.
yeah, this one. And again, like, is it top 3? Is it top 10? Whatever. But Ween chocolate and cheese is also special to me because Disco and his wonderful, wonderful significant other, his beautiful wife, introduced me to that album way back in the day. But it's every song is good. Every song is actually different thematically. That album, it's almost like they experimented across the board, and thematically it's not the same, yet it all being different, it works as this taking it a step further, otherworldly. Just
You've always liked the genre bending bands. You don't necessarily like it if it's strictly one format. So Ween is shown, like they put out a country album. They've done, all these different things. So
yeah.
they don't like being constrained by, hey, this is our sound. And I think that's kind of indicative of your personality, which leads back to what I said originally. Like, I think you can find out a lot about people when you ask them what they're listening to.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And number 3 is Fishbone, Truth and Soul. I was going there. Not putting Paul's Boutique in there is tough because that was such a, we were in high school. It was such an instrumental part of our childhood. And like you said, that one, for whatever reason, those red, yellow, orange, and green tapes, I think we have now brought up Paul's Boutique 2 episodes in a row. But that album just went to a whole nother place. And it I don't want to say it's the soundtrack of high school because Fishbone, Truth and Soul, and Red Hot Chili Peppers,
Yeah.
Uplift Mofo Party Plan, and Red Hot Chili Peppers title album, Red Hot Chili Peppers, are like that to me is early high school when I was forming. I went from the Led Zeppelins, the Police, the classic rock to like who's taking it further. And obviously Flea and Anthony Kiedis and Angelo and all those guys took it to a whole nother level.
Well, it's also hard, honorable mention in our own conversation. Like I specifically remember both of us kind of mind blown first time we heard 3 Feet High and Rising, as well as
yeah.
All Right. So hearing De La and then Far Side, like that whole 1-2 kick when they were coming, and Tribe and all that, like that Daisy Age stuff was that left a big impact as well. I know for both of us.
I remember exactly where I was when I first heard 3 Feet High and the Rising. The first song, obviously 3 is the magic number. I know exactly where I was. And he was a drummer. He was a good friend of ours. And I was in his basement. There was a party going on there. And when I heard that little riff at the beginning, whoever I was talking to was like, just like a dog, sticking its head out the window. I couldn't believe what I heard. So yeah, I can,
think about that. And like, I have a formative memory associated with music, and I'll refer to our friend as Yannick Schmartlove, but he had a green Volvo station wagon, and there was a prominent cassette tape from a band called Guns N' Roses. And I specifically remember getting in there and hearing that for the first time. And this isn't off topic. Being able to capture that discovery moment is something that is now becoming more and more possible with the advent of on-chain music. So being able to really timestamp, being able to, put it on the chain, so to speak, is part of, what we're looking at with this evolution. And I just knowing the passion and knowing how it's a conversation starter for so many folks, and basically music has saved so many people's lives. It's just such an important factor in the world that I think part of that is part of my overall thesis in terms of, I really think music could be one of the things that breaks, kind of Web3 or on-chain through to the masses. And I think the people's passion for the music and their ability or their proven track record of going along with whatever technological advances have come their way in order to be able to hear the music better or access the music better, that track record makes me very bullish on the fact that I think music may be, and music fans may be, some of the early adopters that are needed to kind of move the space forward. So
and I think also, no, that's a really good point. Really good point. And I would say smell, olfactory, like when you have a scent, and you're reminded of grandfather's house, there's 2 things that can just transport you back to a different era and almost be there. And I would say that sense of smell, like, you know, your grandfather's cologne, or just that house smell, or the camp smell, or outside, or spring, and music. Like music can transport you back to what you were doing around that time. Like I said, I remember the party and the room I was in when I first heard an album. It taps right past the thinking brain and goes right to the stem, you know, the reptilian stem, to just get you in the mood. So
and I think just, I mean, we can go on forever about the passion and love for music, but
and we might.
Yeah, we shall. We don't have to hit a commercial break. Come on, the second show.
Second show. We got no sponsors.
Yeah, but I just think music's medicine, and I've learned over my life that if I get into a more down headspace, it means I haven't been listening to music enough. And when I take the time out to just be like, dude, let's put on some records and let's, you know, just escape and go there, like nothing's gotten me through, you know, different parts of my life more than music.
Yeah, I go, you know, I've been in crypto since 2015 now, and I go pretty hard and heavy into podcasts. And I think the evolution of these long 2-3 hour podcasts where you just have the time to really break things down, you know, like we're going to do, is such a awesome thing. But I catch myself sometimes, and I remember, if I ever overdo it or I feel like I'm burned out, like music, you fall back and it just hits that reset button for you. So yeah. Really good point.
All right, well, let's stop soliloquizing. I don't know if that's a word. And
it is now.
Yes, indeed. And we put together a couple things just to take a look at, to kind of monitor or kind of keep us moving on this journey of this conversation. So, you know, I think that if you got to be ready for a revolution, and I think that on-chain music, which we want to talk about today, and the potential is really could be the catalyst to, you know, significant adoption. And that's what we're excited about. So we're going to take it way back. This is just a quick look at the evolution of music consumer formats over the years. And, you know, we don't need to necessarily talk too much about the phonograph versus the gramophone and everything like that. But it's interesting
I call it a Victrola, just
RCA
so we're all on the same page. With a dog tilting its head sideways.
Yes, that's the RCA logo.
Yeah.
I actually have one of those little trophies that had that. It was actually from my wife's aunt worked there or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
At RCA Victor. It's
the only time I remember RCA is back in the day at Disney. Space Mountain had that whole like land of the future as you walked through. And I think RCA did everything. So the dog with Victrola tilted head was everywhere as they predicted the future, you know, what 2008 was going to be like with Wi-Fi toasters and all sorts of, you know, smart things like that.
The point of this really is, if you look at it, it seems like about every 20 years or so, a new technology kind of evolves and steps in and takes over and kind of revolutionizes it. So you look at how it started with kind of phonographs, and then it goes into the flat disc records, which we kind of all know. But then radio came into play, and radio, it's certainly not a sexy medium right now. And it's certainly, you know, streaming is certainly, you know, influenced, but there was a time when radio meant a lot to a lot of people. And it was, you know, it kind of invented something that people have really identified with down the course of time, which is this concept of theater of the mind. So people used to, you know, huddle around the radio and kind of just sit back and listen and let their imagination do the visualization of the stories that were being told over the radio waves. And there's something very powerful about it. And it also shows the power of audio and almost passive listening, yet you have so much in your brain and you have so much space that's kind of dedicated to audio that you remember things that you hear. It's the whole point of jingles and advertising. It's the whole point of earworms and hooks and songs. Like, you might be listening to a Drake song in the background and not even understand that he just set an earwig on, or an earworm on you that you're going to be popping out later. So
yeah. And when I think of old radio too, I mean, I don't know if this is the 20s or early 30s, but there was a show called War of the Worlds, and people were listening to it and they were hooked on it. But I think it was the first show, and people literally thought aliens were coming in to invade from the show, because that was your, now it's your Netflix appointment viewing, but then you actually had to show up at a certain time and certain place. They did not have record function until much later, but people literally panicked all over the United States thinking that the alien invasion was imminent from this show, which is just mind blowing today.
Yeah, and that's also, I mean, they used to have a weekly presidential address. I think they might still, I don't know. But, that was how the president would,
Audience
get
11.
through to people. Yeah. Audience 12-5.
Yeah.
Good job, guys. But anyhow, so if you really, again, this is more just to kind of talk about, the capacity. My takeaway from this is the capacity of the music fans to, prove that they will adopt new technology, because it's pretty much happened, every 20 years or so. And people tend to do it based on either, an improvement in sound quality or, an ease of access that came into play. So
yeah, ease of access, and remember size too. Like the things got smaller and smaller and simpler and simpler.
But for us, not to keep going down memory lane, but it's like we all remember the first time we had a cassette Walkman when that came out, and how that kind of changed how you could listen to music mobily. And then, obviously once you could start using, an iPod or your phone, like that changed the game. You didn't have to bring records around. We all went through, having CDs and like taking them out of the case and into like a kind of soft book cover, holder of those. There were times when you'd have to like put a cassette tape with like a little adapter to be able to play your CDs in the car. Like we will jump through hoops to listen to music the way we want to listen to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Back in the day, one of my favorite pieces of technology was my yellow Sony Sports Walkman, waterproof perfection. It was, I would say that device was the peak of that era. And the only other thing I would throw out too is it's also interesting that on this chart that you made, the 8-track tape gave way to the tape. Now the 8-track tape was a much higher quality audio. So all the cool guys with their mustaches and mullets in the 70s had their 8-tracks in their cars. And, and our generation went to the tape. It wasn't because it was better sounding. It was simply because it was smaller and more convenient. And then you could get into more personalized stuff. The 8-track, actually, I believe you could skip way more quick from song to song, where the tape, you literally had to make the tape go forward and back. And they finally got those scrubbers in there where they'd find the blank spot and stop it for you. But the evolution is, it's an interesting line. It's not necessarily like perfectly linear on just like better, like sound quality, arguably from the 8-track to the tape to the CD, which turns it into ones and zeros, arguably got worse.
I mean, yeah, a lot of aficionados will swear to this day that vinyl is, the purest way to listen to music and represents, gets to more of the grooves and the emotion and, everything from that perspective. You also remember remember you'd have to like put the pencil in the cassette tape and like wind it around when it would go too
Spin
far.
It. Yeah. Thank God for the hexagonal number 2 pencil.
And then you felt like a gangster when you had a dual cassette tape box of some sort, so you could record and make copies and make mixtapes. So again, it's fascinating. But to get down to the bottom of this slide, the current
we have
era,
effectively done a whole intro dating ourselves. Great job, gentlemen. Great job.
Yeah, as you were. But if you look at the current era, and this is more of what we're going to focus on moving forward, but we're looking at just a time, and everyone uses the term exponential in terms of change and things that we're looking at, in the space overall. But, music NFTs represent a significant opportunity for innovation that would benefit not only the artist, but the consumer as well. The only people that may not benefit as much is the established power players in the music industry. And that's something that we'll delve into a little bit more. But I will say kind of the white whale out there for me has always been the virtual live concerts, and being able to experience the feel of a concert from the comfort of your own home without having to deal with the parking. Sometimes you want to go and you want to pregame and get with friends, and there is nothing that replaces that feeling when you're with 8,000 other people who are feeling the notes at the same time and everything. But the experience of the metaverse, which I know, is not necessarily in vogue to speak of right now, but that capacity to be able to experience live concerts from your, from your headset and from your setup at home is something that's quite exciting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Your live concert, your virtual live concert experience, were those 3D? Were those just on TV streaming? 2D? What was it?
No, I'm saying that's where it's heading. And that's always been my dream, is to be able to be like, oh,
Got it.
Primus is playing in Seattle, and I'm going to just plug in and watch it. And it's going to be a great experience, for me doing it. I think that, I think some video games have been incorporating that pretty well, in terms of
Well,
bringing.
Fortnite did it. Yeah. And Fortnite was, my child was never a big Fortnite guy, but I know he said that all of his friends, he said Fortnite's gone through like 4 or 5 almost failures, and they kind of had to reboot. But one of the big reboots they had was a live concert where apparently it just like boosted them right back up to kind of the top notch. And I think Fortnite is still going strong to this day, but they're definitely on the cutting edge of these live virtual concerts. And, I think with virtual reality too, the more you get into that, Apple's coming out with theirs, but, Oculus has had theirs out for years. We actually developed some prototypes in there, but I've been in the Oculus space and played around with that in the early days. And, I went to the base of the Himalayas, for the big hike. Like, to put that into concert form, I could see being just extremely effective, if the audio is just as good and immersive as the video. It's like you're there, but you don't have to worry about the cigarette smoke.
Yeah. If you go to like electronic shows, they've been doing a really good job of merging the visuals and kind of taking that to a transcendental level. So super excited about where that's going to head. So I guess the point of this whole, let's look at the phonograph on is I remain genuinely giddy about where it's going in terms of the developments. And if we take a look at the next thing that we put in there, this is just to kind of, the big thing we want to talk about and understand today is about the tug of war between the artist and the influence of the establishment, and kind of how that is, and can music truly transcend and become a decentralized force and a leader, with the decentralized movement. And we'll just take a quick look at, kind of the powers that be over the development of the music industry. In the very beginning, it was like people that owned the sheet music publishers dominated it. That was kind of before recorded music. It was, hey, I'm going to play this. Da, 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 da. I'm assuming
that's fascinating. So if you owned the sheet music, people had to buy it off you, and there was just a couple companies that did this.
Yeah. And I want to say that kind of, that was kind of before Nashville got involved with, where you would have like songwriter factories sort of stuff, but it was really the recorded music. And then once you got like the next phase was, in the 1914 ASCAP came around, and that was the first time that kind of there was an organization that advocated for songwriters to get paid for what they put together. So that was more for when people were doing live shows and public performances.
So I'm caught up on the music sheet here. I'm gonna do a whole 4-hour show on music sheets. But if you and I were in a band and we're playing in a nightclub, do we have to possess these sheets, or was that, if you couldn't play by ear, the only way you could really arrange this for your band?
I think that's probably the case, because where else would you refer to the songs from? You know what I mean? Where would you pick it up to play it by ear, unless you happen to be right at that spot, hearing it at that time, and able to kind of transcribe it? So I don't know. You go way back,
but how would they plan for counterfeit sheets? Oh wait, they didn't have Xeroxes back then, so maybe that wasn't as much of a problem.
Yeah, and we can go way back to the day of Amadeus and Vienna's. If we
I want to go caveman and cave etchings for drum beats. No, well, maybe we won't go back that far.
Yeah, we have to move this journey along to the current time, so we're gonna have to take a look at this.
I want to go backwards. You want to go forwards. I want to go backwards. Let's go to the dawn of time.
Yes, that's the yin and the yang of the friendship, my friend. Indeed.
Okay.
but looking at the 1950s to 70s, that's when the major labels really understood that, hey, there's money here. And they started these major labels and it became super, super centralized, which has unfortunately pretty much been the theme ever since. The gatekeepers established it, and it was, you pretty much had to go through these five labels, and they pretty much owned them front and back. The artists, they had all the sway, all the pull. They were the gatekeepers. They understood how to get your record into stores. They understood how to get your record promoted. Those were, there's some books out there that are pretty interesting in terms of talking about the days in the 70s of payola, where it'd be like, they deliver the record with certain not safe for work content within it to incentivize plays. And
like a big fish's head wrapped in a
yeah,
blanket or something.
Yeah, or potentially something that people might want to ingest in different areas of their nostrils or things like that to lead to plays. So
it's just interesting how this era too is it's the post World War II. It's the big corporate area where the soldiers come home from the war, and you're already you already know how to be a part of a very big unit and among bigger units and bigger units, and that's evident everywhere in how companies were run, and most things were big. It was hard to be an entrepreneur then, but it sounds like you're saying, just like many industries, this was no different, and there was 4 or 5 just Goliaths that dominated the space, and a lot of it was just big business, and a lot of it was late night shady under the table dealings and how things get done.
Yeah, I can't believe no one's really done the proper movie, about that era and about that whole thing. There's lots of rumors and innuendo in terms of who funded the early record labels. Was it potentially tied to organized crime, and how did that come out? And then it got Madison Avenued up, and even in more modern times, you look at some of the independent labels that came up from hip hop, and you look at what funded those labels to a degree. You have Death Row Records, and was that funded by Suge Knight, and where was he getting his money? So
right.
It's always been kind of a frothy subject to get into. There's a lot of elements to it. And here's one side little story note. I did have a time when I worked for some of the big major labels from kind of a freelance perspective. And I was charged with trying to help create buzz for certain projects, which kind of equated to, radio exposure and stuff
Right.
like that. And once you get a record that's not moving and you're getting paid from these guys, I've never felt more scared in my life after I got whisper screamed at from a call coming in from the 212 in New York.
Did you say whisper screamed?
Yes. So what that means is you kind of have a pit in your stomach when you're like, okay, I know this record's not really doing what they expect it to do, and I can't really get it played. So my hands are pretty tied on that. But then you get a call and it's like, hey, Disco, I don't like the lack of action on this record. Let's make this thing, turn it around now. And I hung up the phone and I'm like, dude, I think I just got whisper beat up. Like, I am so bullied and intimidated by that whisper. And that was kind of some of the world that touched at that time.
That's terrifying, where you like have to lean into the phone that's already against your ear. Like, I think I'm being threatened here, but passive aggressively, I think I'm in trouble. And of course the song that he's asking you to promote, this isn't the one that actually sells itself. This is like his niece who he promised fame and stardom to. You're like, oh gosh,
it's a tough sludge.
What am I going to do here? I love it.
So then, just to keep it moving on this. So then we moved to the next 80s really. And as the 80s overall was very, kind of image centric, it made sense that MTV would come along and emphasize, visual representation in music. And again, that created kind of a whole cottage industry of making music videos and, getting that. But from that time, MTV broke a heck of a lot of artists, and they made artists have other stages of their career. And the artists that adopted to that format and really embraced it are kind of representative of what I think we need for on-chain music. They're kind of the innovators that saw the potential of a new technology, and instead of running away from it, they embraced it. So I think of like David Bowie and Prince as people that really kind of understood what the new technology could do for them, and really, took it to another level in terms of producing movies based on their soundtracks, and, really going far with that. And I wish to God that we had both of them around right now, because I think
Yeah.
they would be blazing trails in terms of understanding how to get away from the powers that be and embrace the potential and all the artistry that can come from an understanding of the potential of on-chain music. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, what was the first song that MTV, the first music video that MTV played? Do you know?
video killed the radio star.
Yes. And now you have to guess, in my mind, even though that is the perfect lyrical and vocals, what it should have been. I'm a sound person. I'm not a lyrics person. I'm like 98% sound, 2% lyrics.
Okay.
What would you guess that I think that it absolutely should have been?
Whew. I throw out. I don't know if it's a song you would like. I was gonna say Dire Straits' "Money for Nothing."
Yep.
Yep. Whew.
Yeah.
I was on the hot seat with that one.
Yeah. So I wasn't going to let you
Mark up.
burn. I wasn't going to let you burn too long, but I'm a big Dire Straits fan, but I mean, obviously that song was almost written for it, but I think the melody on that song, like when I think of MTV launching, I actually have a very close relation who worked there for a long time. So they just absolutely loved it there. But that video with remember the whole 80s coloring in his jacket. I mean, it's literally just them playing with like pastels colored over. That was a big thing. But that, to me, that soft intro to just his guitar playing, and obviously just "I Want My MTV" was to me that was the song.
And they were like moving around refrigerators or something, right? Like,
yeah, there was definitely a storyline there. I don't know how deep it went, but I think there were refrigerator moving and movers. We'll have to check that after the show to see how accurate we are. But it's a lot of him on stage with his long curly hair, with a mullet in the back, and his headband. His Rod Laver tennis headband, just sweating and going. Like I love Dire Straits. My favorite song could be "Calling Elvis" from them.
we might have to put a playlist together after this.
I wish we could play songs on
I
this
know.
without royalties.
Oh.
Just so they're like, and thank you if you do get popular one day. Every cent that your show made, even though you had 80 million downloads of this show, the big record labels have taken all the money. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Don't quote me on this, and this is more just like to kind of talk about when we're seeing this publishing and the influence and how much money, and why we can't get away with doing that right now. Is I'm gonna botch this to a degree, and we'll go back to the tape and check it, but I believe that Puffy or Diddy or Love or whatever he is right now,
Pick one of 39 names.
I know, but I think he pays at least $5,000 a day for sampling Sting for his song about Biggie.
God, that shows you how much he's
Think
making.
of that money. I know. And it's
So at
not
some point,
he's not in the poorhouse, like Diddy's fine off of that, but you're right now. And Sting's just sitting there like, oh, great. Like, hello, and we referenced the Verve earlier, and, they used a little snippet, and,
they
that
use
really
the violins in the background of
like the
Bittersweet
string
Symphony, the string arrangement. Yeah.
So that just kind of shows that there really is a lot tied to this, and it is a business, and it's going to be difficult to completely disrupt, which is interesting because in the 1990s, we had kind of our first window and chance at decentralization in music when like Napster and Winamp came into play. And that really represented the first time that you could go around the system, and it showed, you could go peer to peer, and it was just unbelievable. And it really, really, really ruffled a lot of feathers, to say the least, and was extremely disruptive. And it's very, kind of sad to look back and be like, dude, imagine what would have happened if we could have gone further with this. And
it is. It was the nut of the first of the decentralization nut was coming in the 90s. Everybody's probably heard of Napster and knows what it is. I believe that was led by Sean Fanning. And,
Yep.
you know, if Napster, if we had to fast forward everything now with the intelligence of VCs and angel investors and how much money is in tech, back then the record labels literally like wolves circled around him and just sued to destroy. Now I think that Napster would have had, well, it's tough because that was literally just all the music all day long. You could stream it, you know, and that was right at the beginning when broadband came in. But it would be interesting to see. I think he would have had way more defense now because some VC would have been like,
I'll take a chance paying your legal fees for potential massive upside.
he was ahead of his time, got crushed. What I don't think people know about, I just want to touch on, is Winamp. Winamp was genius. It was way ahead of its time. And basically you had your CD collection. You would stick it in your computer and Winamp on its central server would be like, oh, you own Air Moon Safari, you own Zenyatta Mandata by the Police. Cool. It's in your collection. So they would validate that you owned it from the CD and that it would be up there and you could go to someone else's house and play it for them through their internet connection on their computer. Cause remember the mobile devices we're still looking at like clunky CDs. I don't even think the iPod had come out yet, but it sounds so ridiculous and arcane now, but that was so ahead of its time. That thing got crushed so quickly. It was gone before it came. The music industry made sure that Winamp and that whole movement was going to get crushed fast.
I know. And if you think about it, like that was so crypto, like that was so decentralized. It was,
Yeah.
it was just, you know, you talk Satoshi, you talk, you know, coming up with Ethereum and everything like that. This is on that level, you know, of coming up with a completely different way to, you know, what you just said about Winamp, you know, that's basically validating almost through a wallet. If you think of it, you know, like, hey, yeah, no, you own this, you purchased it. So there's a lot of parallels there. You did touch on when iPod and everything came around, which is actually the next section of this timeline. So about 2003 was when iTunes and Apple came into the play with all this and really turned the distribution upside down, making it, you know, really the world's a digital record store now. You didn't, and I hate to say this, but you know, one of the things that I think is the saddest out of this is kind of the loss of traditional brick and mortar record stores. Like to me, like any town I would visit, you know, anywhere in the world, or, you know, I would always go to the record store first and, you know, see the different posters for who was playing or where the venues are. The record stores were almost inevitably in kind of the center of the cool part of a town. So whenever I'd go somewhere new, I'd always sniff out the record store and just kind of talk to the clerks and see what's going on. Here's a record store.
And the record stores over time, the cool ones, the record stores were, that was like the cool central vibe of it all. Because also remember what happened in the CD era. You had Coconuts, Tower Records, which I was not a fan of. There was actually a decent Tower Records in Chicago by where I worked, but that was like that consolidation corporate at its worst. But we're talking about the really the vinyl shops that were the like, center of cool.
Yeah, there was a cool Tower had a really good store on Sunset, and that was really cool. Like I saw like Backplay there, and like a bunch of people do record releases, and in like Chicago area, like Wax Trax was a really cool record store. And that was like the first time I saw like those super big posters, and I went crazy and threw them all over my room after I saw that.
So you're saying Tower had cool roots. It just, they were the ones who got even bigger than Coconuts. Like, I'm sorry, even saying Coconuts, I'm like, I refuse to go on Coconuts, and everyone else sold CDs for $14.99, $13.99, and theirs were always $18.99. You're like, Coconuts.
I guess to put it into our vernacular, it would be more platters and pipes than coconuts.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. So another little tidbit about that era too. I switched so I had the Creative 6 gigabyte It looked like a CD player, but it actually had a big hard drive in it. It was heavy, but I could hold all my music. The navigation was just a couple up down arrows and a power button. It was clunky, but it was portable music. And when the iPod came out, like, why all of us when we were young didn't literally go into our mattresses, get our change jars, God, I'm dating myself here, and go and buy Apple stock. Like, we were like, duh. When the iPod came out, you know, this younger generation, if you're listening and you're younger, the impact of the iPod with the dial, the first dial actually moved, and then it was all touch control. The dial didn't move. You just swirled your hand around it. It was a deck of cards in your pocket with all your music. It was the moment.
Yeah. And remember, you were also, you were in tandem, or maybe a leader over my wife, in terms of having the like 1,000 rotunda CD player for the stereo. Remember, like, it would just go all the way around.
Yeah, I kept mine at 6. I wasn't afraid to rotate. The 100, to me, that one, it's just like you heard more spinning and whirring switching CDs than you did actually enjoying music. Like, you put that thing on shuffle and, you know, it's 82-second gap between songs, just like a, you know, move the CD, the arm comes in, you know, the beginning of the digital era where mechanics are still heavily involved.
Indeed. So yeah, that's transformative. Let's move along, or we'll have to update the slide with the next evolution. But really, you know, kind of the 10s or the early, from the 2010s up till now, really, it turned into, you know, Spotify and streaming just kind of came out of nowhere. And again, that's technology enabled, and it just changed everything. You didn't have to even, just the whole concept of being able, oh, dude, I'll start playing it on my phone. Oh, you like that? You can just go, and then it's instant. So that's just a huge seismic change. And again, I just think that the whole point of this conversation is to tee up the fact that music fans are ripe for adoption and innovation. And I think that they can lead to part of this transformation to a potential decentralized music ecosystem and environment. So just kind of wanted to warm people up.
I just want to make one comment there. Before it got to Spotify and iTunes, where you could pick any song, play any song, and the algorithms were also good. Once you played your song, it'd be like, oh, he wants to hear more of this and this vibe at this beat per minute. So remember, there was Pandora. I believe they were first. And Pandora, I always joke, they were the front runner. And it was almost like the what's it called? The MySpace of, you know, where Facebook won the game, number 2 won the game. Pandora, you would play something like super mellow. Let's say you played Led Zeppelin or you know, you played Metallica. I swear by the 5th song, their algorithm was so like wonky. The 5th song was always like Jimmy Buffett. You're like, yeah, maybe there's some work to be done here. But yeah, and then you got to Spotify and iTunes, and it was any music you want, anytime, any place, anywhere. Make your playlist. It just opened the whole door. And I think where Spotify won was the user interface and that algorithm to find you and your vibe and what you like. I've most of my music in the last decade has been from the Spotify algorithm being like, oh, you got eclectic B-side, super low tempo, like 12 beats a second vibe. Like, here's 80 bands you haven't heard of. And I'm just like, oh, I love it. So
yeah.
Anyway,
really quick, my thing on Pandora versus that was Pandora didn't enable you to pick a specific song. You would pick like the artist, and it would do a channel or a station based around that artist or song, but you couldn't say, I want to hear this track by this artist. And that's kind of what Spotify took to another level from what I remember.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point.
So the point is, you know, we've evolved, technology's evolved, the power structure's evolved, the way that we experience music has evolved. And then if we take a look at the next slide, you know what hasn't evolved and isn't fixed is the music industry. So this is a way to look at. It's just a model I put together, and what's kind of pathetic about it, to be honest, is I probably could have done this same record label advanced structure from like 1950 to like 2022, 2023. Like, they're not changing the structure that they, do deals with artists. And it's
So Matt,
really,
I'm an 18-year-old coming in. Explain to me, just so people don't get overwhelmed by this chart. And we have to thank our very, very kind assistant, Chatty GPT-4, for making us this beautiful chart. So you and I are in a band. We're 18 years old, and we're getting better. We're getting tighter with our music. And a record label approaches us after the show, buys us some drinks, and we're hanging out with them. Explain to that. Yeah. What am I hearing here?
Yeah, perfect. So essentially what a label will do when they sign an artist is say, hey, we're going to give you an advance on your future, success. So we're going to give you $100,000. And and with that deal, you owe us X amount of records over the period of time that, we're working together. But the sad thing is that underneath it, it's baked. The cake is baked in such a way that the label is always going to benefit. So it's usually about an 80 to 20%, 80%, 20% revenue share, right? So the label's always going to get 80% of the upside. The artist is going to get 20%.
Wow.
But the thing that people don't understand is the label's not going to lose, because the label will first get that 100,000 of the advance money back before the artist starts to see any money at all. So
right. Okay. So you and I get $100,000 from the label, right? And then we get it from Geffen, and then we go into the studio and we record our album first. Is that generally, because you said these are generally like 5, 6, 7 record deals, which, so they're locking you in probably at the peak of your youth and creativity. They're locking you into this very egregious contract. And for people who can't see it, we'll go through it. But if the label gives you $100,000 and you make $100,000 on that album sale, you receive at that point $0. Did I get that right?
That's absolutely right. So even if you make $250,000, the label's going to get their 100,000 back. The label's also going to get 120,000 off of the profit share, and out of that 250, the artist is lucky to get 30,000. Now, there's so many different ways to talk about how this is broken. You totally hit on one of the biggest points that actually really Billy Corgan crystallized it in an interview that I heard a couple weeks ago, where he said the game that's so dangerous with the record labels and artists is all you want to do when you're 18, 19 and you're getting a little bit of buzz and you're psyched that there's an audience out there, and the label comes in, flashing all these things that they can do for you and how great everything will be if you sign with them. They get these people, who are kind of a bit naive as to what they're signing, to sign to do 5 to 6 albums. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you zoom out and you look at the creative process of most artists, there's a peak creative period. And if you're getting someone when they're, late teens, early 20s, and you sign them to make 6 albums for you, say it takes, 2 years-ish to put together an album, you basically are locking that artist in as an indentured, representative of the label for the next decade, 12 years of their peak creativity.
Wow.
So that's why you have all these artists, especially the bigger ones, as you get bigger and find success, it's like, dude, I just sold X amount of records for you. Well, when's your next record coming out? And we need a hit. And what we were saying about the sophomore slump and all that, they're like, we want the record to sound just like the first one. So it really takes away the whole essence of evolving as an artist and being able to find your groove, find what resonates, respond to your audience, and really be able to be organic and go.
So not only if you're successful, they are basically like more of the same, please. So you artistically, you're now getting straitjacketed, unless you just kind of rebel. So they're focusing, they're giving you this money. They're lending you this money that they recover first, which that in itself, I get it. Like they get to recoup their expenses for taking a gamble on you. But I guess what strikes me the most here is that, you're saying you make them 250 grand in sales and you make 30,000 and they get 220,000. So for every $50,000 more you make on sales, you said 80-20, you get 10,000 of that.
Yeah. And then divide that out with band members, right? So, one of the big legacy stories of, label and artists, butting heads was Tommy Boy and De La Soul. And, those guys would talk about, dude, we're selling millions of records and, splitting this between the three of us, like we can't, keep a job. And that's one of the things that I really, when we get into more of the artist benefit for Unchained, like that's fundamentally what we're getting at, where the upside is. And also one more note on this before we move along is part of that advance. And this has always just blew my mind, but part of that advance, the label kind of earmarks how to spend it with themselves. So they'll be like, oh, we're going to put you into the studio that we own. And that's 40 grand of that. So, or we're going to use our house producer and we need to pay them. So so
are you saying it's basically like, welcome to our movie theater. Oh, and here's our popcorn. That'll be $62. Enjoy the show.
Yes. 100%.
Wow.
And then the worst part is the label, once you, so say, we come up and we have a collection or, we're a band and we're like, dude, this is great. We're doing all this. The worst part is unless you're really the ones that are driving their revenue, they pay no attention to you. You're a lost cause. Like they love the notion of it's the most cliche, but they throw it against the wall and let it stick because they're in a no lose and they go to where the water's warmer all the time. So
they will bail on you at the drop of a hat. What percentage did you say usually get the focus?
Probably like 2 to 5%, like that's
percent. So of every 100 bands that Geffen or whoever signs, 2 to 5 will get the attention and all the money at first. And even they may be bailed on. So they're just looking for the Taylor Swifts. They're looking for the mega superstar. So it's almost, it is like an angel investor, a VC with all the leverage. I mean, VCs are smart enough to give founders of companies, they want them to have more skin in the game. It sounds like with music, because it's such a passion play, and this person, most creatives aren't super savvy businessmen like Mick Jagger and can, as they get older, really, carve out the business and protect the bandmates. It sounds like you're saying you didn't have a prayer. Is this still the model, or are we still back in time? It is?
No, that's how it is. And that's why I say the music industry is broken. And let's go to the next visual, because this really kind of encapsulates part of the issue here. So when you take a look at what we have here with this visual, and I want to try to explain it to everybody who's listening as opposed to viewing. And again, shout out to my guy Pastrami for putting this together. It's just a really great way to kind of just see, I hate to say it again, but just to see how much the artists aren't being taken care of in the equation with the record.
Right. So Pastrami made a royalty streaming calculator. Is that correct?
Yeah, and basically it outlines the big, digital streaming platforms from Spotify to Apple to Tidal to YouTube Music to Amazon and Pandora. And if you plug in an amount of streams, and we just look at it from a million stream perspective, which sounds like, dude, I got a million streams, I should be on Easy Street. Let's buy my mom a house. But if you look at a million streams on Spotify, that equates to $3,180 for the artist.
Wow.
Yeah,
and that's a wow, not high,
not a good wow,
and great. Yeah, that feels low to me. Like $1 million to me for video views. I know it's not long-term commercially viable, but that seems like the spoils are not being shared to artists again equally. Is that fair?
Yeah, very fair. And just outlining it. So Spotify, I guess, is it's not the leader. The leader in terms of actually taking care of the artist probably not ironically for a streaming company owned by an artist, which would be Tidal, and Jay-Z, like for 1 million streams, at least that artist would get paid close to 13,000. So they're kind of the most artist friendly of the group. We don't need to go line by line on all of them.
Is Tidal, is that, I assume it goes Spotify biggest, Apple Music second biggest. I assume there's a massive chasm before you get to the third one. So if I'm reading this correctly, if I have 1 million streams on Spotify, I get $3,100. Apple is at least a little better, over double at $7,800. Tidal, who you said was owned by, you said, who was
Jay-Z.
that? Was Jay-Z. He's the best by far for artist at 12,840, quadruple. And then YouTube, it looks like, oh God, Pandora, the first one, they're 1,300 and YouTube is 2,000. So it's all over the board, but it sounds like you're saying the net is it's low.
Well, think of it. So the total is, you're doing 6 million streams, right? So 6 million people interacting and not downloading, but listening to your creation. 6 million across those platforms, evenly distributed. You're making $34,000. That's ridiculous. That is almost impossible. And I think that what the benefit of looking at this is, again, talking about how the music industry is broken. You can't make money on streaming unless your name is Taylor or Drake. Like, aside from that, you're not going to make a living just off of streaming, which is essentially where your music's going to be played now. So it's just very disheartening to look at this side of it and to really see what the artists take home. And how can you really do anything, with this current industry structure? And that's why they haven't changed it. And yes, Spotify and these other things that we looked at as innovations, unfortunately, it feels as if any sort of disruption or innovation to the ecosystem of the music industry kind of falls in line with the let's take care of the power structure as opposed to the artist. And that to me is the central reason that I'm so passionate about learning more and discovering how blockchain and how, moving towards a decentralized music power structure is so important.
Wow. So if I'm getting this correctly, it feels like big music labels have been massively disrupted by tech. And would you say that Spotify and Apple are even more powerful than the big record labels? Or is it a dual kind of oligopolic, I just made up a new word, dance where one needs the other? Because the guys they have the library, the labels do, and Spotify and Apple basically centralize the entire, apparatus to hear said music.
Yeah. And it's always, even when we went back to the sheet music, right? It's always been about controlling the gatekeeping and being the gatekeepers. And that's the theme that, I want to talk about. So now we can get away from visuals and we can just have a little bit of a conversation ourselves for a little bit.
Can I just make one more comment here that stands out to me? At the bottom, it says you get 100% of the royalties. So if you have any sort of manager or any sort of obviously label, this is if Disco in Chicago started a band and we uploaded and had 1 million streams per all of these. So 6 million total, we get $34,000. If we have anyone else involved, that dilution goes down very fast. Like if it's 80-20 with the labels, doing the math, you get about 7,000 of that. I mean, just head scratchingly horrible. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, totally. Like if there's people with their hands in every single way, and that's kind of, they're picking your pockets every way you can, every way you look, you got to make sure that somebody's not trying to get a little piece of your pie. And as we've seen, like you really got to be doing a ton of tonnage in terms of streams to be able to make any money to begin with. And that's if you're doing it directly without any side deals or supporters. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's a lot to process if you really think about it. Like
it really is. And it just shows that the middlemen, and women in between these industries, just like I always use the MasterCard analogy, they're everywhere. And in this, with Spotify and Apple and getting streamed and getting on there, it's not a simple direct path. It might be easier than before where someone could get on there, but there's still a lot of toll takers along the way.
Yeah. And that's why it is such a fitting case to kind of look at, because that's what decentralization is all about, right? Isn't kind of the core of decentralization to eliminate unnecessary middlemen from picking your pocket and taking a little taster out of what you're doing. So, let's take a little bit, like I'm gonna pull back a little bit from, how broken the music industry is, and kind of transition to a sign of hope, which is how incredible, a movement towards on-chain music can really be. And first, I'm going to talk a little bit about it from the artist benefit. Like, what do the artists get that they can't get out of the existing system? And really, it kind of starts with the fact that the blockchain provides true data. And okay, we all kind of understand the concept of the transparency and, the ledger, all that sort of thing. But the bottom line is it can eliminate the middlemen in this relationship between the artist and their fans. And it's incredible because if an artist is able to have direct access with their fan community, they can really build a community on their own terms, and things can come from that own little artist community ecosystem because they're able to see, hey, these are my super fans that are, down with me from day one. They were in on my first mint, and they have X amount of them, and they're passionately supporting me, and I'm going to have perks that I'm going to give these people back. Like, hey, you want direct access? Do you want to, you want to contact, you have any ideas on what I should do for remixes, collaborations, tour stops? I've had an artist that I follow who's primarily, on chain, and he'll put stuff out there like, hey, I'm putting a tour together. What city should I go to? All that
but
stuff.
Can't you and I, sorry to interrupt, but can't an artist, like, again, Disco in Chicago are starting their band. We've got to get a band name in here at some point. It's a recurring thread, but couldn't we grassroots, like, build a Discord, or I don't know, like, isn't with Web 2, isn't some of that stuff already happening? Like, before we get into super blockchain, can't, you've got Widespread Panic, you got these bands with mailing lists. Don't they already have direct access?
There's direct access from like a mailing list, but a mailing list is an outdated, mechanism.
Agreed.
I'm saying that when you supercharge into the capabilities of implementing Web3 technology, it eases the road so much that you're having way more. So a mailing list, what are you going to call, the guitars from Widespread and be like, dude, you didn't come to Savannah this week. Like, I wish you would. But you can DM, you can have messages, you can have space, these things where you're directly getting, real-time feedback. You can put a track up and be like, hey, what do you think the next single should be? And have it be a poll of just your ardent fans. So that you're catering to your crew.
But you could do that, just to push back a little, you could do that on Twitter too. I mean, are you saying that because of all the management companies, there's just generally too many layers? Again, I go back to Chicago and Disco's band, Decentralized Dawn. I don't know. No, that's lame. We got to have a better band than that. But couldn't we use some of these direct tools, or is the middleman is what is getting in the way, where the blockchain and the immutability of having songs on there and art and all these other things, is that why you could take it to the next level? Because I don't think yet communication on Web3, it's coming. You got friend tech and you got these new things, like, it's getting better. It's almost like the Patreon of Web3, but is it the communication? Like, I that's the part I'm not fully comprehending yet.
Let me give you an example that speaks to this whole construct. And there's an artist, Daniel Allen, who I mentioned earlier, and he would be considered an independent artist. He wasn't part of the, major label ecosystem prior, and he's really carving out a path for being a native on-chain artist. And what he did recently is emblematic of the opportunity moving forward. And that is, he did a seed round on, through NFT raising, everything like that, a seed round from his supporters to help to create his next project and label and everything like that. That is not possible. And again, we're sitting here talking about, the potential on-chain music or music NFT space. And really we're talking about like maybe 10,000 people that are active at all in the space. And that equates to, I think Coop said this, but I think that equates to about 1% of the music listening population. So
if that, I mean,
right. So
globally, I mean, it's probably 0.0001 unless I'm doing my math right. It's a small number. So we are, I hate you're so early, but you're saying with crypto and NFTs and the art community, like that system is still so new, but you're saying with music, it's just like sprouting out of the ground right now, or it's still got planting roots and the roots are coming out of the bulb underground. It's super early.
Yeah, it's early.
Okay.
It's springtime. But the bottom line is there was never a way for artists to, put together something like that. And there was never a way for artists, if you look at the technology side of it, to drop, the way they can do NFT albums. And all this is in infancy, and it's kind of trial and error right now, trying to figure out kind of what the sweet spot is and what works the best. But how cool is it that you can mint an album and not even have all the songs finished yet, and then airdrop the different songs to the wallets of the holders as it goes? Or you could airdrop tickets to the shows. Like, nothing could be done like that before. It would all have to go through the record label or your artist manager or your tour manager. And
or if you're indie, or an email. So the beauty of this, you're saying, where yes, you could communicate through these Web 2 channels, Discord and stuff.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, why Web 3 is so important, you can galvanize that grassroots support with family, bandmates, family, friends, people who caught you early and love your stuff as you're getting your sound together in the concert halls, in the venues. You can bring them together and get funded from, it feels like a GoFundMe almost. And you're saying when it's on chain, you could actually, that person, obviously again with Gary Gensler's and securities laws in America, like who knows how that's going to shake out when more modern financiers figure out how to integrate this good technology. But you're saying you can go back before the labels and the streaming systems have a chance to get their hooks in. They're not going away overnight, but maybe there's a way to get this grassroots growth where you can stay kind of pure independent and create what you want. Is that close?
That's very close. And it's so, there's so much that's close, like there's so much that can fit into this ocean of opportunity, right? Because you go back to what we were looking at from the streaming side of it. So we showed that, or we were talking about that example that had equated to like 6 million streams for 34 grand. You could do 1,000 piece mint and make that money overnight, and that money goes to you directly. It doesn't have to go through any other means. So that's really the heart and the essence of the opportunity for the artist, is to be able to utilize that money and almost self-fund opportunities. Because if you're in any of these structures and deals, you're going to be waiting for your payouts for God knows how long it's going to take before the money lands in your account, the pennies on the dollar that are coming. Whereas if you do something and you activate your audience that you're cultivating and you're communicating with directly, and you understand who your super fans are and you can super serve them, then you can lead to doing these things on the spot. You can decide, hey, I have enough songs for a great album. I'm going to put it out next week. Let's do it as an NFT. You don't have to go through any of that stuff. So it's really about enabling artist control. And most importantly, probably, the artist can maintain all of their publishing rights. You don't have to give anything to anybody else. So if we put our band out, decentralized disc, whatever the heck it is.
Oh, I like that, decentralized disco. We're getting better. By the end, we're going to have one we both agree on, but I like decentralized disco. Although wait, Why isn't my name in there? So this is your band? What am I like the backup triangle player? Thanks a lot. All right, we'll work on it.
We already have the lead singer, lead guitarist dynamic. We'll have to figure that out. Yes, indeed. But what I'm trying to get at, and I'm so passionate
I'm not sure which one of those I am, but I will figure it out over time.
But what I'm trying to get at is there's a way for artists to be able to build their own career on their own terms. And again, I'm going back to Daniel as an example because he said this and it really, really resonated with me. On-chain music provides the opportunity for something new in the music business, which is a quote, middle-class artist. Okay. Let that just sit for a second. So you can't pay your rent and do what you need to do with the existing system unless you're in that elite Taylor Swift, Drake.
Yeah.
But you can manage yourself as a truly independent on-chain artist, and you can control your imaging, your music, your publishing, every single thing about it. And you don't need 2 zillion streams to be able to pay your rent. You can find your fans, they can connect with you, and you can have opportunities with them to grow together and to sustain a life of creating the music that you like and be what does it take to be a professional, right? Isn't that if you're able to be paid for your art, like that's really the goal of most artists, right? Like they want to not have to have a bunch of side gigs and, and then also they don't want to have to sell themselves to the different, entities and play the corporate games and do all that. So there's this beacon of the essence of independence, right? And independent labels have always been where the best stuff comes up. Independent music movements has always been the true side of it. It kind of goes to, remember when Death Row Records was selling NWA out of the trunk of their car, that's true.
Grassroots, going back to the beginning when the music and the art was pure. Yeah, everybody has those dreams and aspirations as the 18-year-old to make it, big time, and you have those dreams, and that's part of what drives you. But the purity of that music, like you said, that NWA's first album, Straight Outta Compton, wow. Raw and just exposing the world to a place that most of us have never been, and it's just incredible. And you're saying, with decentralization and this technology, just like with a lot of different industries, this could allow us not only to grassroots grow with our group, but also to grow independently without having to tap into the big players, just getting their hooks in and being middle folks everywhere.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
okay.
Absolutely. You're exact. That's great. That's a great distillation of it. And if you also just, think about it from the consumer or the music fan perspective, what benefit does the music industry infrastructure give to the music fan? And I really I think the answer is pretty self-evident. Not much. They're serving themselves.
You're a consumer at best, and you're not super connected. You're saying you get the big marketing media money pumps out of there, and it does go more grassroots. It will change everything.
Yeah. If you're a fan and say you're, the biggest, you listen, and you can see in Spotify, your percent of, whatever you are of a top percent listener of some of the artists and stuff like that. But what do you get for that? Nothing. Whereas if you're an on-chain consumer and you're identifying with the artist, you have a direct communication with the artist. They can take your call, so to speak, on, getting some feedback on your thoughts. They can solicit your thoughts. They can give you special opportunities. When you get into think of it from a fan perspective, think of how cool, and you understand NFTs better than I do, but think of how cool it would be to release an album with generative different album covers, and you would have your own, when you start thinking.
Well, they're immutable. They never change. They're on chain, and that person who owns it, you could, again, securities laws aside, you could say, hey, what's the name of our band right now? Decentralized Disco.
Chicago Disco.
Oh, good. Because Chicago.
Chicagoland.
Disco. But we could basically say, hey, I'm raising $50,000, friends and family and early fans. You hold this album art cover, not only do you have this album, but you could get royalties, and you're part owner. You've helped fundraise bootstrap me, and you're part owner in this. I mean, I already love music, having skin in the game like that, to me would be just mind blowing.
Yeah, we can dig in a little bit further into that in a second but I love where you're going with it, because
Okay.
once you kind of start sipping that and being like, wait, it can be so much better for the
Yeah.
artist, and it can be so much better for the fans. It just really changes things. One point is, as a music fan myself, there's always been something about the discovery, right? Like who turned someone on to something first, like who was really the first to be down with
Right.
XYZ. And
Like within a friend group.
within a friend group, but also
So
within
true.
now within the whole world, right? And that's
Who are
that's
the
what happens.
tastemakers?
So if you're on Sound or one of those marketplaces, they it it marks which number fan you were. Like, were you the first one to get this NFT?
Oh, I
Are
didn't
you in
even
the first
think of that.
5%? Are you so you were staking your
Wow.
claim? And not only that, you can make comments on the wave file or whatever, being like, this track's dope, and you're on that forever. So it's just a whole
Oh
new
wow,
world
a
of what you can do.
mutable fan, a mutable comment, and when you like,
Yeah.
what fan you're incentivized to be a tastemaker, and dare I say, a future. We all can be A&R.
Yeah.
What does that even
Thank you.
stand for? I know it's the guy who finds the good music. What does A&R stand for?
Artist and repertoire,
Oh, interesting. Repertoire, French word. So the
which is
A&R,
which sounds as outdated as the system, right? Like,
I love the word repertoire, but yeah, maybe that one should be shortened, just like decentralized.
stay tuned.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we kind of, touched on the benefits for both, listeners and artists. So I think that it'd be fun kind of to take a quick look at what's being built now in the ecosystem. And the first thing I would say is, in anytime you take a look at something that's really kind of a burgeoning, developing space, I do not profess to say that I have a handle on all the different platforms and things being built right now. So I don't want this to be considered inclusive or exclusive or anything. I just wanted to take a look at some of the different players who are doing slightly different things,
Okay.
and look at it just from well, what does that mean to us, and what does that mean to this potential movement?
Okay.
If you take a look at, we have an on-chain evolving and building ecosystem, kind of the big players in the beginning. You look at the music marketplaces, I call them kind of the digital record stores, right? So this is Sound XYZ. They're kind of the big player right now. That's where you would go to, kind of look through different catalogs and opportunities and mints and things from that perspective. So
So am I equating them to Spotify and iTunes? Or yes, but it's a little different in Web3 because you're kind of buying a piece of ownership.
Thank you. And that's part of the fundamental difference, right?
Okay,
Like,
got
you own it. You don't own anything that you do on Spotify, right? But here you do get that, and that's kind of the extra thing.
So if I bought from an artist I like, whether he was known or not, or she, and they had music and they made money just from royalties, I could get a kickback, correct? I sorry, I shouldn't say kickback. I could get part of the proceeds from those royalties, correct?
Again, SEC, I think we got to look at the next.
Okay.
With this, these are more, in my mind, where you're purchasing something that you like or you dig, and you may get extra perks or benefits. And so I kind of look at it a little bit more from that perspective.
Like a collectible, like a super fan.
Absolutely.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's how I look at that.
Got it.
Kind of another one that we can look at is Gala Music. They're in there as well. And what I think was interesting was, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, Gala Music did a drop with Earl Sweatshirt and The Alchemist. And I'm going to do a deep dive, and I'll share that if anyone's interested. But that represents like some significant, credible artists utilizing Gala or utilizing on-chain as the first way to have access to this whole drop in music and this whole release. And
Right.
again, a little side deep dives coming on that, but I want to see how it played out in terms of how many people bought it. But also, the more interesting thing to me is how well Earl and the Alchemist did on this sort of drop, as opposed to what they would do through their traditional means. So it was
Well, I mean,
really,
you said 10,000 people right now. I assume you can't even compare apples to apples. It's like apples to refrigerators, because there's millions and billions of people who love music out there, but so few people into the blockchain. I'm going to stop saying blockchain. I just don't like it. Into Web3 and Ethereum and immutable. But it's so new. It sounds like it's more of experimentation right now. Is that fair?
that's fair, but I don't know, because the metrics will change, and that's what's, so fruity about this, right? Like you can have,
Fruity.
yes, but well, think about it. Like, so maybe you have 500 people get involved with this.
Right.
Their margin on that could be more than if they had 50,000 sales in the traditional
Oh,
method.
because you're getting money way more direct, and you're getting either
There's
super
no
fans
middleman.
or early on, maybe even speculators or people who are like, hey, I like this tune, don't know this guy, but I'm going to get some of these early collectibles and these early songs that I want to take a gamble on and own and see what happens.
Yeah.
And the artist could make, you're saying, even though the sample size is teeny for this stuff, the metrics of revenue are just so much bigger. You're not making $3,000 per million stream. So you actually, even with a tiny ecosystem, could win.
that's what I want to flush out. So
Dang.
Stay tuned. I'll do a little addendum to whatever we're doing today and kind of see what I can find out on that.
Oh, maybe follow up on the socials or something.
Yeah, but what's interesting is just to see that there's artists who are very creative, who are starting to, figure that out. And those
Right.
artists, the artists that are kind of going to do that in the first wave, are the ones that are kind of the pioneers that understand the power of being independent and maintaining kind of your own ownership of your brand and your art and your music. There's a couple different operations who are focusing on this notion of being able to democratize royalty access. And it's been something that, we look at the amount of money that people have made and why there's been focus on the music industry over the years, is it can be very profitable. And there's a couple groups. The first one I think is Royal, that we would talk about, is pioneering the ability for fans to do exactly what you said before, which is participate in the royalty payouts for certain tracks from artists. So it's a incredible notion. And I know that, to kind of get into the Chicago parlance or vernacular, it's an annuity. You can own a part of a song, and granted, you're not owning 50% of the publishing at this point, but owning a small percent of it, you get, I believe Royal's doing quarterly or so payouts based on the streaming. And I hold a few, and it's just, it's an interesting feeling to get a note or a notification from a platform to say, hey, you can claim your royalties from your purchase of this song. And
Yeah, I love annuities. My third ETH validator just went live and online today. I'm very excited. Just ongoing annuities for a deflationary asset. But so sound.xyz versus Royal. So sound.xyz is more your traditional, like, go through catalogs, listen to artists, listen to music, and buy a song. Whereas Royal is taking it to a whole nother level of, yes, you actually, there's this song, there's only 500 available or whatever the number is, and you get to buy a piece of it, and you actually, based on the name there, Royal, you get actual royalties. Is that the differentiator between these two ecosystems?
yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you nailed it.
Cool.
Sound is more of a marketplace, and you can do that, but this is tied to that. And then there's another player in this space, and this is newer, and I just kind of sniffed it out in preparing for this and looking at this, and it's JKBX, which essentially stands for jukebox. And there's a gentleman involved with it named Scott Cohen, who used to be like the chief information officer at Warner Music, and he started something called the Orchard. And it's just so interesting what they're doing in that right now, because they're tied to they need SEC approval, and we all know how that's kind of tough to navigate. But they're working on this where right now, if you went to their site, you could reserve a spot so that when the SEC approves access to these publishing rights, then you would be able to purchase and get involved. So for an example, if you wanted to buy shares in, there's this example I got from an article that said, if you wanted to buy shares in the composition of a song called Sucker, which was recorded by the Jonas Brothers, one share is going to be priced at $28.41. And there's 97,000 royalty shares being offered with a market cap of 2.8 million with an estimated royalty share yield of 3.34%.
Wow. So we're getting into, again, these annuities are almost bonds based on music. I mean, it's like a stock market.
Yes.
What a cool thing. You know, one of my instinct says that because music is such a passion industry, you know, when you're trading and buying and selling bonds, you know, your only goal is to make revenues. So many super fans will be like, fine, 3.8% would be great. I just want a piece of a Jonas Brothers song. So
yeah,
you could see JKBX Jukebox having a very good position as this matures. What a great idea.
One of the things that's compelling about it is that it's tied to like super established big artists. I think I want to say U2, Beyonce, things like artists like of that stature. And I think that they take, you know, they find maybe it's a songwriter or producer who has XY amount of the shares and kind of brokers a deal to get that. But it looks like it's supposed to evolve to a legit marketplace where you're like buying and selling song rights, right. You know, so it just shows that there's a lot of eyes on this and there's a lot of opportunity. And I go back to the fact that there wouldn't be if people in the know didn't understand that music makes a lot of money. And you know, like there's something there or it wouldn't be going on. One more kind of cohort of people doing some interesting stuff that came across is Audius is one that's focused more on decentralized streaming. So I guess the way I would equate it would be more of a on-chain SoundCloud where artists can directly upload their work to the platform. And then it's kind of cool because then fans can tip the artists. So like you have whatever you have for the Audius token, like you can give, 10 tokens as a shout to an artist for doing this or that. So it's just remarkable that that's getting built. So just think of, the possibilities there. Another one
that's really cool.
Another one I've been looking at, I actually spoke with Nick, who's on the team at Serenade in London a couple months ago, and just was kind of digging into some of the stuff they're doing and why it works or why it could work really well is they're basically putting out digital collectibles. So almost like album covers with unique behind the scenes features that you can only get by owning that collectible. So I have a couple. I think I have one I mentioned Frank Moody earlier. Like, I think I'm going to go see them tomorrow night. And I have a Noel Gallagher who's from Oasis, and they have these kind of extra Easter eggs and things like that you can only access through that. So down the road, like music nerds are pretty into that sort of stuff. So I'm paying attention to what they're doing over there because I find it quite interesting. And
so when you go to this concert on Saturday night, are you going to get a digital collectible, do you think?
No, because it hasn't infiltrated like that tour system yet. Like I got that beforehand. I got it from Serenade months ago when they did that drop.
Okay. So the digital collectibles, the best analogy right now is, I want to say, whereas t-shirts and sales and cool, unique things at the concerts, think of that in the digital sphere that stays, and is minted on the blockchain that you get to hold forever.
Yeah. I actually went to this was weird.
That's cool.
I went to a concert by the Weeknd last summer, and I was probably one of 4 people to do it, but they offered a NFT, commemorative NFT, if you had a ticket, and you had to do it through Binance and all this stuff or whatever. But I did snag one, and I don't think a lot of people did. I don't think it was really, mentioned or really pushed, but it's headed that way,
Dude,
and
that's a win. Like only a couple people were savvy enough to do that. At some point, obviously we wouldn't be doing this show if we didn't think that decentralization and the blockchain could revolutionize and democratize so many different industries. The fact that you have one of four, or even if it was one of 98, you have, in my opinion, a first of a kind. It's like the Honus Wagner baseball card that a certain friend of ours claimed to have, maybe did, maybe didn't. But this beginning, that's back when baseball cards were in tobacco pouches. You've got something that so few people even knew to think to collect. Think about baseball card now. There's so many collectors out there that by the 80s, it was like, collecting almost became a commodity because everybody's like, I'm getting a complete set of Fleer Donruss tops. And that's when the market just collapsed because everybody's got them in their basement and they're everywhere. Whereas the Honus Wagner card from the tobacco pouch in the 80s, or the Earl Campbell rookie football card, because he didn't want to be on football cards, I believe, after year 2. But these things that are in limited supply and that nobody even really knew about or got to are worth so much more money. That's cool.
I hope, we'll see how it goes. I didn't do it for that. I did it just because I was excited to, go down the rabbit hole and see what was coming out of it. But it is, and who knows, maybe it was way more than what I'm saying of people who activated and did it, but we'll get into that in
doesn't matter.
Yeah. We'll get into that in 2 seconds, because that's what's blocking it right now, is that it's very bulky. I had to get a Binance account and, and fit in,
however many, remember, it was a small number, and that will always be the first collectible for that artist, and one of the first in the entire ecosystem of this new way of having collectibles that you can't go back. And with the time essence of the blockchain marching forward into infinity, you can never, every block that's created just made yours more valuable. And this whole industry with music and blockchain may not take off for 15 years. Like this will be more than the crypto punk of this era. So it sounds like you're not making a big deal of this as I am. I will give you $61 right now if you transfer that to my wallet. 71. Final offer.
If I could figure out how to transfer it, I might consider that. We'll see.
Dude, I'll fly out there and do it.
All right.
I think it's gonna be worth something.
All right. Well, I'll hold.
I think it's cool.
Thanks for pushing to the hold. I like it. And then just really quick, I wanted to shout out Loners and Rio Kagan, because I think at the forefront you need, and this is kind of what's going to have to happen for this to really transcend and take hold and go. You need people of the ecosystem that really understand the ecosystem to maximize the tools and opportunities from an artist's perspective. And I think Rio's doing it more than anybody. With Loners, it's like a label, a distributor, a curator, kind of helping people on board to learning how to release stuff in on-chain ecosystem, kind of working to curate, different drops, really at the forefront of, looking at how you can leverage. And I'm going to bumble this, but there's some sort of ERC token, like a newer one that fits with what's going on with kind of this new way of having, the different generative art drops tied to your music and everything like that. So just shout to that. Go dig into it more if you get some time. And I think you'd be really impressed with what they're doing. But that's what gets me really excited, is having, kind of leaders within the space who understand the tools and understand the benefit as an artist and care about their followers and their fans, to be able to be like, gosh, look at what we can do. And we may mess up on some of this stuff, but no one's ever been able to do, hey, I'm just going to release 10 of these, or the labels wouldn't let you do that.
You got to try and break stuff to, and sometimes the mistakes are the coolest discovery or aha for what can be done.
Yeah. So again, it's not a full exhaustive list at all of everything that's being built, but I don't know, it gets me giddy and it gets me really, almost like childlike wonderment of where this is going and what can happen. And, so the ecosystem's building, but can it go mainstream is kind of the big question, and that will kind of dovetail into the rest of our discussion about. And just like what you were talking about with the weekend NFT, um, the tech is not there yet. And that's going to be a bit of a stumble gate in the beginning. How do you, there's 50,000 people at the concert I went to. Every one of them had the same access or right to be able to download that NFT, but I think probably about seven did, would
Right.
even, because right now it's just not there. So I certainly hope, and my hope with, kind of looking at the ecosystem is that there's going to be some teams that are really going to understand how to make the tech become secondary and really be more behind the scenes on this. So I think
Right.
even like Audius, who I referred to earlier, when you go to and use that platform, it looks very Web 2. And I think it's by design because more people would be comfortable interfacing with that as how things are right now. Like almost
Yeah.
having it be more familiar could make up, could be something of interest in a weird way. So
Well, and there's a full Audius has a full token. I assume it's on the Ethereum blockchain as an ERC20, correct? Okay, so Audius has its own tokens. I know I looked at that a couple of years ago, or maybe when it first came out, or maybe when we've had our first discussions on music. But it's
yeah,
got a whole tokenomics tied to it in order to interact with the ecosystem. I assume artists get paid in the
audio.
hypothetical band, the Chicago and the Chicagoettes would get paid for. You notice how the band name, like you're kind of getting pushed out. You're kind of getting pushed out of the band now. We'll find a place for you.
I already got hyphened, so we'll see what happens next.
Nice. So, but with Audius, you actually part of that ecosystem is getting paid in those Audius tokens. Correct. Okay.
Yes, that's how you tip. That's how fans can tip artists and stuff like that. So it's almost
very
like
cool.
a waiting for it to catch up to become what's going to do that. And then
Right.
the other part of what's kind of the roadblock right now, and what we need overall is we need to have an on-chain native artist just have a breakout. You know what I mean? Have something that's so compelling that people will take the extra steps to be able to access that, and to be able to have kind of that use case and case study of like, hey, this thing broke out of here, so get involved and get into space. And I think we're on the precipice. It's hard in the bear to really understand, would you really want to launch a lot of this new stuff right now, or do you want to wait
Right.
till things kind of turn? But suffice it to say, the ecosystem is building, and I think they're moving towards a lot of really, really exciting stuff.
So do you think it's going to take do you see that coming from a mainstream artist who adopted, and the song that they call it Royal, they actually released like their A side, the one, that you'd be playing at the radio stations and really promoting? They do that. It's a big guy, or do you think it could be an indie guy where the song is so good that the kind of a grassroots upswell comes up and people rally and buy it? I think I already know what my answer would be just by asking that question, but what do you think?
It's for it to be authentic and for it to have the legs of not being like, people just coming in to take advantage of what's being built or to get into the new thing. I think having it be on-chain native would be of most significance. So, and that would start to create an ecosystem where it's like, hey, this is how we did it, or I did it this
Right.
way. And then, we always talk about the 18-year-olds and who's doing it. Once it becomes a no-brainer to people on the street, like, dude, why would you go that way when you can do it this way? Then you're going to see a renaissance of music, and it's going to be just mind-blowing in terms of the interactions and everything. So that would be my take. You already have, because, and not to, obviously you hit a passion point of mine because I can't stop yammering about it, but obviously when you look when you look at the Royal, they've already had some big artists involved. Nas is one of the most prolific and respected MCs, of all time. And he's been there. And I think it's been a great success for the people that know about it and got involved. And, I was involved with the Chainsmokers as well as Diplo on Royal, and those are pretty big names. So
are they putting out let me interject, are they putting out their best song, or are they experimenting? And I wouldn't blame them if they put the C side out, but are they putting the good stuff out?
Yes.
Wow. So
New stuff, like newer, like
okay.
the Diplo one I got was, or I have, is called "Don't Forget My Love," and that was like an anthem of last summer, and it was nominated for a Grammy this year. Like, so it's not like it's just like, it's not like little clunky cases in the closet. Like, oh, here, give this one. You guys have you can get the publishing off of something that's not getting a lot of spins, but basically, people are putting their better foot forward on it. And again, we're talking about, however many people are aware of it and however many people understand how to navigate with the wallets and purchasing and things like that. So it's really just waiting for the onslaught to come. But I'm really proud of all these different organizations building for this, because the future of it is just, it's phenomenal. So
wait, you're saying when Diplo, so you have a piece of this Diplo song, correct?
Yes.
And it got nominated for a Grammy. Have the Grammys happened yet?
No, this was a while. The ceremony was probably, I don't know, 6 months ago.
Did you watch? Like, I would be on the edge of my seat.
Yes, I was rooting like crazy.
Did he win?
No.
Oh, but
no, we were disappointed, but it was fun.
But Disco owns a piece of a Grammy nominated song.
Fact. And that could never have happened without on-chain and decentralization. That's why this is just, I don't know. I just think it's the most exciting development that I could come across.
It is. Have you received a royalty from it?
Yes.
And went after the Grammys, because it got nominated. I mean, sometimes losing, it ain't winning, but coming in second, third, fourth, or fifth and getting your name thrown out there, that's big too. Did you see the royalty check increase that next quarter?
I didn't see a spike on it, but we can get into a whole other thing on the Grammys and their relevance.
That's because no one watches TV anymore.
Yeah, and because no shade to Beyonce, but I think Beyonce won for like the electronic category because
she just like dominated.
Like,
okay,
yeah, so it was kind of blah blah blah. But yeah, to say people aren't building things would be ridiculous. To say that the potential of the space isn't there would be ridiculous. To say the upside for artists is not there is ridiculous. And to say the upside for consumers is not there is ridiculous. So this all is pointing to, when's this all going to happen and what's in the way, right? And I think we have something that we could take a look at that kind of might explain, some concerns. So the move to decentralized, it's a no-brainer. Well, not so fast. Let's take a look. Streaming, we look at this from a triangular perspective for those of us that aren't viewing it. So we have basically the pyramid, so to speak, of power in the centralized music power structure, and you have streaming, and that's kind of anchored by Spotify as well as iTunes. Then if you take a look at the publishing, it's still, I mean, this is ridiculous, but it's still essentially the same five that we were talking about from the 1950s to 70s of the big five power record labels are still have their hand in the publishing side of it. So you have iTunes, Spotify on streaming, you have EMI, Sony, Universal Music, Warner Music, and BMG on the publishing side. And then frankly, the simplest way to say it, everything else is essentially Live Nation. So they have their hands and ownership of venues, artist management, you name Ticketmaster, like you name it, and Live Nation is snatched.
That was almost an afterthought by you, like, oh, and Ticketmaster. Yeah. I mean, growing up, Ticketmaster, there was no Live Nation growing up. If there was, it was quite small. In the 80s, 90s, I think the 2000s they were there, probably late 90s they were there, my guess. But yeah, Ticketmaster was the monopoly's monopoly. They had a lock, and somehow now Live Nation owns Ticketmaster. I suspect Ticketmaster just took the name to be shielded, but that is everything else is a behemoth. So wait, you're saying Live Nation, which is it venues, tours, and obviously Ticketmaster, like where the community, like, and your tickets will be $600. Oh, did we forget to mention the convenience fee? That'll be another $138. You're like, Yeah.
So they have access to a string of venues. They have access to, and access, I essentially mean ownership, right? And
Yeah.
they can essentially curate the festivals to a degree. If you're looking at the sort of like large scale, that whole thing that came, basically, I give Perry credit for that. The Lollapaloozation of the summer touring system is
Perry
now.
Farrell, Jane's
Yeah.
Addiction, started it all. Yep. And was that 90 or was that a couple years before that?
No, I think it was 91.
Okay,
It
that's
was
fair.
whenever Nothing Shocking was out, I believe, or Ritual. I can't
No, that
remember. No, it was
was
Ritual.
Ritual. The De La Habitual was out, which is when I got into Jane's. I did not get into Jane's early, but I quickly went to the back collection and was very pleasantly surprised. Also, I was probably with you. My memory doesn't, it goes back far, but it's also spotty. I'm sure I was with you at the first I know I was at the first Lollapalooza, but I assume I was with you
Yeah.
and other people. But great concert, and then obviously that's turned into a whole. I assume he sold that long ago, correct?
I don't know if he sold it. I'm not sure if he's still. It's part of. I think there's a group out of Austin that it's tied into,
Got
but
it.
it's.
Because at some point he's probably like, I don't need to run this anymore. Like you guys run it. I get my founder's cut, and I'm gonna go make music and be awesome.
He's been on a couple tracks recently that I was. I remember when he was at the height of his fame. People were always a little bit concerned, like, how's Perry going to make it? Is he going to do all right? And he's alive and thriving. Like,
He did just
kudos to
fine.
Perry. Like
Well, and you talk about musicians who are smart business people. Now he might have had help around him, but the fact that he started Lollapalooza in the first place is, I mean, kudos to you, sir. That's
yeah,
incredible.
yes, a big tip of the hat. So, just in understanding all of the benefits that we've outlined today, all the different potential upsides, all the areas of exploration, all the different ways that things can be built to kind of transform this, what we already kind of demonstrated is essentially a broken industry. Um, the hope is that it'll overcome the powers that be, and the spirit of decentralization and the benefit of decentralization and the benefit of artists and consumers and people moving on chain is there. But you got to wonder, is it going to necessarily happen? Because we had kind of that Napster moment where, there was a tool for decentralization. And if we're quite frank, and I'm not a VC specialist, I probably mispronounce half the names and don't understand the logo soup and whoever the LLCs are, but
Right.
they've sniffed out the opportunity, let's just say. And a lot of the organizations, even that we referenced a little bit today, many of them have ties to VC funding. So that's kind of the thing that we really got to kind of see how that shakes out. What we
So you're saying the Sound XYZ, the Audius, most or all of these, and obviously there's a million others, but most of these that you've identified kind of as things to look out for and watch to decentralize, you're saying, whereas Google completely upended so many industries, especially entertainment and stuff like that, you're saying these record labels, they're built to survive, and this is a savvier era. They're on top of this, and a lot of that seed money is coming from them.
Well, if you go, like, remember we were talking about the whole influence timeline, and we saw from the centralization from the 50s to the 70s, and then, okay, now MTV came in. They were crafty enough to figure out a way to maintain relevance and control as things changed. And
Right.
they did the same, when it moved into iTunes, they still figured out how that's going to work for them. And, before they were probably making money off of, manufacturing CDs and selling them at a
Right.
jacked up rate. And when that format went away, so just as nimble, I guess, as the fans are in terms of being able to adopt to new technologies and new formats, the powers that be are pretty nimble. And I think that's kind of where I'm stuck. You can
Right.
tell that I'm like a kid on his birthday waiting to open all the presents, from when they show up. But then it's like, but what's going to be in the box? And, that's where I kind of settle on this of, not necessarily knowing. And then frankly, it kind of impacts me with my perspective of the entire, movement, so it's the same as, are the banks just going to get their hands on figuring out how to do transactions with different blockchains and,
Right.
kind
Like
of
using
co-opt
XRP instead of Swift or whatever. Like, is that a win or is it not? So many of these VCs and record labels, and is there a discernment? I know these technology companies have just, crushed industry after industry and just innovated so much. Is most of the money and the backing and the intelligence behind this the labels or the big tech entrepreneurs and billionaires like A16Z or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Like,
so insiders from the music industry and the big Goliath VCs and whoever else can get their bag in the game.
Because you have to look at it like they've made a habit of looking over their shoulder and knowing what's coming, so they're not going to be caught flat-footed and be like, well, we had no idea that now that people can do this, that we're not figuring out how to, kind of entrench our moat, so to speak, and, kind of protect what their core business is. That being said, I don't think anybody has the right to control that. And that's where I fundamentally get passionate about it. Like, if I'm an artist and I want to share and use new technology, and I just wrote a song that I think would resonate with people, I want the right to be able to do that on my own terms. And I think that's what the opportunity in the decentralization movement of music is. So that, to me, I don't think anybody has a right to stifle. I just am, call me slightly cynical, but I'm concerned that this opportunity of a potential revolution in terms of how people distribute, consume, and, interact with music will be impacted by roadblocks of different natures.
Right. So our band, now we're 19 because, we love to talk and we're getting a little more mature and I'm finally getting whiskers on my chin. Do we have, obviously with Web 2, so many tools came in for entrepreneurs to be able to, start tech companies. And, you didn't just have these Goliaths. Like, the internet allowed so many people to sell online, and it created the ability for so many more businesses. It sounds like the labels and the streaming companies still have a lock on this, and they're invested in this future wherever it goes. So I guess, do we now, as slightly more mature 19-year-olds in our band, Willy Wonka and the Decentralized Donuts, do we have a chance to go grassroots and try and the entrepreneurial equivalent would be bootstrap? Do we have a chance to bootstrap before anyone gets their hooks on us, do local shows, and really grow this and do it ourselves because of the independence and immutability of the blockchain?
That's it. Like, that's the question. And that's,
I'm asking you.
I know, but if I had the answers, I'd be there. I think that it really comes down to needing a class of a new generation of artists that grew up and developed out of that ecosystem to be able to say, hey, this is the way that we do it. And no, we're not. Why would we do 80-20? Or why would we do this deal? You're not giving us the return on our investment in our relationship, right? So once you have kind of a breakout or two, then they'll be able to tell their friends in cohort, like, dude, you got to go on chain. Like, it makes so much more sense.
Well, not only tell their friends in cohort, they'll help them do it. And then little independent, what would be the best name for that type of company? Indie label always had resonated really well, and it was a super cool name. And you worked around indie labels, and we knew other people who did. Like, that's like, if you want to be cool in your 20s back in the 90s and 2000s, like, being an indie label was that. So this almost taking this indie label again and helping people around you. Yeah, you can take a cut, but the cut would be way less, and you're offering a good service. And the cut isn't 20 from label to artist. Maybe it's 2080 or even 1090.
Yeah.
Indie, there's got to be a good name for that. We got to think of it, but the artist gets 90%.
Yeah. And you have to look at, if you look at the timeline, the labels had to scramble when Sub Pop in Seattle was getting these artists that were resonating, and then just blew up, and the problem in that scenario was the artists went so far with Sub Pop, but the infrastructure wasn't in place for them to then be able to have their records all over the world, right? Because that was kind of the clampdown that you would get from the establishment on that. So once Nirvana and all these bands started coming out, then it diluted it, because then they all came and tried to find theirs. And I don't want to disrespect certain artists or bands, but there was a lot that didn't have the authenticity as some of the core breakthrough artists, or a little Seattle and then it became chasing that, and it was so
the Seattle sound, there was the originators, and then there was that echo chamber of Me Too's, and true music fans knew the difference.
Yeah. And then, you look at, Master P or somebody who figured out, that, hey, there's a sound in hip hop coming out of New Orleans right now and in the South, and, doing that. So you're taking, Lil Wayne when he was 15 and putting him on tracks, and then they turn into these global megastars due to the talent. So I think that what we really are hoping to see, or at least I'll use the royal we, but we're hoping to see is an explosion of creativity, of like-minded people that want to retain control and ownership of their creation, as well as have autonomy in terms of how they want to operate with their careers, and maximize the direct communication and direct link that they can have with their art, with their fans, that is enabled by on-chain music, as opposed to anything else we've ever seen. So there's so many ways that it can go great, that I'm bullish on it being one of the most transformative angles of the adoption of this newer technology.
So given the current technology right now, I mean, we've got the blockchain, and every 10 minutes Ethereum roughly is making another block, and Bitcoin and all the blocks are chugging away. With our current technology, is it possible right now?
No.
Why?
It's close, because I don't think the technology is user-friendly enough to onboard people that aren't already kind of have an inkling of wanting to go down the rabbit hole to figure out how to start interfacing in that different ecosystem. It has to get the technology has to get a little bit more, as I said before, behind the scenes.
Seamless and visible. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, but I think that you zoom out, that's for the entire, industry or space, right? It's just, it's getting better. And that's the exciting part, is how quick everything's evolving. And I don't know if this makes any sense to say, but it's something that I struggle with. It's I understand that the bear market is when you're supposed to, go head down and build. But shoot, I'd love to see where some of these people are building, at what level some of this stuff is that I haven't seen yet. You know what I mean? So maybe there's some operations that are sitting on dropping a newer release or an update that would kind of significantly leapfrog where things stand. But why would you do it now? So it's just I'm so edge of my seat for us to be able to stop saying we're in a bear. I can't wait.
We are in a bear. And that's why we're building this podcast in a bear. But it sounds like you're saying, I mean, we know, as opposed to the bears prior, this is my third one now. So it kind of becomes, I don't want to say fun, because that's a terrible word, because I don't want anyone to get just wrecked or hurt out there, but it allows you to take a step back, recenter, and build whatever that is for you, and see where this is going. I think a lot of people are building right now. Again, but I'm gonna push a little further. So is the limitation on the artist? Because I think 19-year-olds are going to be able to figure out, if they're already someone in this technology their buddy is, they're going to introduce them to it, they're going to be able to get into it. Is it the fact that the people who might grassroots support you, friends and family, be like, trying to teach my dad how to like check email on an iPad was hard enough as it is. Like teaching anybody who's not there already yet to get an Ethereum wallet and, actually buy Ethereum, then get it on a wallet. Then, oh, by the way, you got to get a hardware wallet and then. So
Yeah.
is the limitation on the support side or both?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, because by the same token, there's opportunity. Like you can go onto, a Serenade or a handful of things I showed you and Royal, and you can plop down a card and buy it right now.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Credit cards are coming more and more. That's true. They have crossed
so
that
that does
chasm.
kind of, that's kind of a, rebuttal to, oh, well, it's too bulky. It's like, well, it's not too
Right.
bulky to put a freaking card down and PayPal it or whatever and
Right.
still get that. But then again, where are you going to store it and how are you going to really interface with it? So it's to
Yeah,
be
that's a good point, because if you're in the crypto space and you're really into decentralization, you're probably into Bitcoin for sure, Ethereum possibly, Solana, whatever. But you make a really good point that I hadn't even considered. Yeah, I you can slap that credit card down, and that's going right into the mainstream fiat payment rail system. So, would the support from the people, if it was like this, for them, you keep saying about these invisible, the more you invisible you make the technology, the more this is going to get adopted. I care about Ethereum and Bitcoin, and that's where I want my immutable art. So going to music for the next generation that comes aboard, do they care what blockchain it's on? Or do they, if they pay with their credit card and they spend $500 to support, 0.1% of the discoettes, is that enough? Because they don't need to know what immutable is. They don't need to know a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that the Chicagoettes are there. For anything to do it, you have to give the user or the consumer enough of a benefit or an upside to go down whatever, path they need to find it. And if there's a new genre of music that just slaps and is speaking to people and is speaking to a, community, and people are really getting pumped up about it, and that's available on chain and not available, through traditional ways, that's the sort of thing that we need. And that's why I was pumped up about, seeing Earl and Alchemist doing that stuff with Gala. It's like we're there. It's so freaking close. Like you can feel like the stews on the stove, and it's like it's getting very close to being quite tasty. And we just need a couple more kind of ahas that'll get people on board. It happens all the time in culture. It takes something kind of seminal, a breakout moment, then all of a sudden everything that we were waiting for happens at light speed.
Right.
And I think that
slowly then suddenly.
Yeah, I think what we're really, really waiting for and looking for is a genre or a community of artists to really put out and resonate with an audience, and that will start it. You look at, and that goes, well, I'd love to talk music. So it goes back to just like, that's what's always happened in music. When new genres have come up, when hip hop came up, people figured out how to understand and deal with hip hop. When punk came out, it changed, and punk was a reaction to bloated, artist centric, kind of mouth or really prog rocky stuff that was like too much. So then they're like, we're going to cut it down to the essence. And I think that the essence of punk rock is part of the overall essence of music. And I think that we need like a punk rock breakout to kind of kickstart what can happen in this revolution.
Right. That's a very good point. So I want to role play here. What and I'm just gonna kind of keep pushing this down the rabbit hole as far as I can. So we're starting a band, Decentral Realization. It's the name still sucks, but we're getting there. If you and I were starting a band, we're 19, what tools would you use right now to get it done? And web 2 could be part of it. So web 3 with the blockchain, web 2 with Discord, or even mailing lists. Like, based on what we have now, how would we push forward?
We would use some of the pre-existing socials to get awareness.
Of course.
We'd be very active on TikTok. We'd be posting through there. We'd be, utilizing that. But then I think the best way for us to, and again, I'd have to ask you, what's your time frame? What are you looking for? Are you looking to make it a career? Are you looking to have it be
we're going for it. We are going for, we love music. This is our passion. We've told our parents, we've given them that hard conversation of like, music is my passion. We are going for it all.
We're going to use some of the existing socials, but we're going to cultivate a community through drops on the different outlets from a Web3 or on-chain perspective. And we're going to nurture that audience, and we're going to come up with releases that they respond to and that they feel involved with. And we're going to curate and cultivate a release and unique releases. And we're going to utilize all the different tools in terms of, unique drops, different sort of, using generative art to make it just new school. We're going to be of this movement. And that's really where it has to be. We need to have a generation of artists become of the blockchain generation, and everything will make sense because it's native to that. So yes, you can utilize some of the existing things from a support perspective or to draw attention to yourself. But I think that if you wanted to really have a sustainable career, this would be the right way to do it. And I would say we'd have to get moving right now before all the other people figure out how to get their kind of claws on how and where this could go. Like, right now is a prime opportunity for people to break out and for
slip in the back door of the party you are never invited to.
Yeah, and use it now and go, because yes, so we say, it's, there's only X amount of people active in the ecosystem or the space at this point. That also, you can use that and leverage that to your benefit by having a large share of voice. So, and then figure out how to maximize what you can out of a smaller, more engaged audience. But it's easier to have a higher share of voice of 10,000 people if there's only X amount of artists that are super serving that, as opposed to being one of the, 50,000 new songs that are uploaded to Spotify each day. So you'd have to have some discipline. But I think you'd make the decision to go on chain, and you'd stick with it, and you'd rise with it as people come to the space. And frankly, we can have all the funny knockoff names, but we'd have to have some freaking jams. Like, we'd have to have something that people want to listen to and respond to. So it really comes down to, are we going to create the art that's going to resonate with people? And I think that's important for the entire space overall, whether it's from, PFP NFTs to whatever it is. I just think that the utility that's baked into the music NFT leads to a really valid potential stickiness to the relationship.
Right. But to get down to brass tacks, to use a very modern phrase, I didn't hear you mention much of even touring, and I guess when you're brand new, you're not touring, you're getting local gigs. So are you building the audience that way? And then, for the, let's say you build your audience up to, you got like 80 to 100 people showing up. You got a good sound. You guys are getting tight. It's getting better and better. For the 3 or 4, hopefully in the crowd, you're like, hey, by the way, if you want to support us, get an Ethereum wallet. Like, literally, education would be a part of getting people on board and say, hey, we're going to release a song. We're new, but if you're here, you like us, and we want to bring you along with us. So we're going to release this NFT, this generative album art with this song or album or whatever it is. We want you to support it, and we're going to help give you the tools. Would you go that way, or would you use one of these existing systems and try and get into Royal, or do you just pave entirely your own way?
Royal's set up to benefit people with an audience. If you already, it's part of like that's more for established. But so you're going down the road of saying as this true startup band, right? And you want to say
Yeah.
band because I look at it as, most likely if we're going to be putting something on, I don't know if we'd be a band. We may be, electronic or hip hop, like I'm not
That's
sure,
a good point.
what
I'm
that
thinking
is.
in 90s terms, how to make
Yeah.
it big, but
So,
you're right. Like,
and I challenge the notion of, like Dave Grohl would say, oh, the only way to, grow your band is to hit the road and tour. But that's kind of a fallacy these days, especially for new up and coming artists, because the venue system is not supportive. It's not doing well. And it's
is that
really,
because of COVID, like the post-COVID thing, or you're saying
it's
it was
kind of tied to it, but it's
okay?
really, really hard to even book a tour because it's hard to even get venue space. So there's a whole load of trouble in terms of, hey, we'll just jump in the van and we'll go tour, like,
Right.
Black Flag back in the day. Like that's not necessarily it. So I think that, there's an opportunity to utilize the technology and the intimacy from the technology and the connection to cultivate an audience without necessarily using the traditional, hey, we got to hit the road. Yes, you can do some events and appearances, but maybe in those, to your point, maybe in those, you spend a little time being like, hey, let's get everybody on board with this. This is how we're doing it. And maybe the people that you motivate and explain and teach how to do it will be the ones that kind of jumpstart the next wave of adoption with their friends. Most movements have to have grassroots support in some way. And,
Right.
it's not going to just happen. You would have to look at it from a completely different perspective of, hey, we're going to, be like the Blues Brothers and go on the
Right.
road.
So
And
my model was the 4-piece rock band, right? Bass, guitar, drum, and lead singer. And you're saying there's with DJs and with electronic music. I mean, now with Logic Pro or what's the other one, Ableton, like everybody can have a studio wherever they are. They just have to make sure the room can generate good sound, and you can plug your instruments,
I think,
and keyboards directly in.
I think to kind of wrap that concept, I think the notion, or what I would be most a bigger advocate for, would be kind of what Loners is doing, where it's more like a collective. And, kind of like when we were talking about De La Soul and Farside. And so like a group of like-minded artists that are coming up that would utilize the same format and create that sort of ecosystem, and it could come from there. So if you were going to do, like maybe you go to 4 or 5 different markets, and then you'd have all the different artists that are of that
Right.
kind of belief and have them kind of galvanized together. I think that might be part of the elements for success, would be more of a collective way to do that. And I know that there's a ton of really interesting collaborations that come to life and have been coming to life with on-chain artists right now. So that's starting to happen. And that's what I think
Right.
is
So when
kind
you
of
say
where
this, yeah. So when you say this collective, like I almost visualize like this virtual insider jazz club, or like, in Chicago, it's comedy is big in these, improv comedy is big in these clubs where people come together and they make awesome stuff. So is that the right mental model for
Yeah.
this, like in this collective?
Yeah, I would look at it like there's been movements out of, like Manchester, when, it started with like Mad Professor was doing things with, Happy Mondays and all that, and it was like part of that. And that movement essentially laid the
Right.
groundwork for rave culture to where it became. I understand rave started, more with house music and things like
Right.
that in warehouses, but that's what I think it takes. It takes kind of a youth centric force that galvanizes people together. And then people are like, dude, I got to figure out what's going on here. Cause you have to remember, and I'll date myself again, but to be able to find a rave back in the day, that was before cell phones. Like you
That
had
was
to,
like the coolest part
yeah,
to find it. Like I found it, you know.
yeah, you had to go and like bring like an egg to the record store to then get the map and, you know, da 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 da. And
Very cool.
kind
I
of,
love
kind of that,
mysteries and maps. I'm a big fan.
yeah. So kind of that ethos, I think that coupled with the punk ethos is kind of what's going to happen to kind of jumpstart this whole ecosystem.
Thank you. So it really it sounds like you're saying you've when it happens, it's going to come from the youth out of a need, and they're going they're going to figure something out. Hopefully listen to this show at least to get ideas if there aren't already savvy ones ahead, but they're going to get these ideas. And you're saying once, you know, it's slowly, then suddenly, once that the fire, you know, it simmers, it simmers, it simmers, it seems like it simmers forever. And then it takes off. And you're saying that's when hopefully again, the big guys literally are trying to catch the tail of this fire that's whipping, and they're hopefully behind the curve, but with the decentralization and the immutability of the blockchain to connect with your audience and to do this grassroots, maybe you don't ever need them, or if you get them, they're a value add that's a more reasonable value add where they're taking a 10 or 20% cut like a manager and agent, and not the other way around where it's just pure, was it usury or usury? It's a shakedown.
Yeah. I think it's a, hopefully, however it comes out, they can utilize, you know, the ecosystem of onchain as a bit of a force field from the pre-existing power structure. And hopefully that will help to reset and re-level the way that artists and music fans are treated in the equation of partnerships.
Wow. So are you, after all this conversation, I mean, we've gone through the history of music, our and the power centers and how a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't changed. Are you optimistic and hopeful for these younger generations expressing themselves and getting a way bigger cut?
Yes, I think that and I don't want to just be, you know, blue sky and lollipops on it, but I think that it's the best chance that we've had to be able to kind of shake up the shackles of the relationships for musicians, artists, and fans. And I think that that's why I get so excited, because it's like there, and you know, you see something and all of a sudden things in the past just aren't as relevant. And if you're able to, you know, SoundCloud kind of showed it. There was a little, you know, we saw Napster, you're talking Winamp, like there's been pieces, little kind of, you know, flakes along the way, little popcorn drops on the trail. And I think that, and, you know, I'll always err on the side of being, you know, believing in the power of music, but I think that music may be the one that kind of forces some capitulation to the existing power structures. And that's what's got me so excited about exploring more of this space.
Wow. Wow. That's very, very well put. Is there anything else we haven't covered? This was an eye opener to me as far as the past, present, future music, but I'm going to start looking for collectibles for sure. And I'd love to get a piece. Like I actually flip on my TV and watch the Grammys if I had a piece of a collection that the guy was being nominated, especially if I loved the music. I mean, that's, to me, that's a game changer.
Yeah. There's no feeling as an artist, you know, than hearing your art be out into the world, right? So when an artist first hears their song on the radio or sees their video, or that's a moment that you can't really understand. And to be able to have some sort of feeling of alignment is kind of what this whole thing's about, you know, being able to share that sort of, you know, excitement as things grow is, I think, fundamental to why I think there's a lot of vitality and a lot of upside in merging towards more of an on-chain music world.
Yeah, I can't wait to see, and I hope it is from the younger generation who are like you said. I'm thinking of a band, but it's just creatives in
Yeah.
whatever venue or whatever modality to get the power in their own hands and get a way bigger cut. Because I love that quote of the it allows the middle class of music to thrive. And obviously some people are going to break way through that, but to be able to have a living and not get so much taken from you as an artist is the democratization of the blockchain and decentralization. And it's super cool. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to be on this journey and glad to be on this journey with you, discovering what can be done. And hopefully people listen to this and it plants the seed for them taking these ideas a whole step further.
Yeah. And, that's what we need to do is, as a space and a community overall, is just try to alert as many people to the opportunity and let them decide how to integrate with it or not. But we have to let people understand that there's alternative paths that are being created now that can ultimately benefit both an artist as well as a consumer. So as loud as we can scream from the rooftops, I think we should do so. And I think it'd be really exciting to watch how it plays out.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing so much insight. Is there anything else you want to share before we say goodbye to our nuanced listeners on this decentralized journey?
No, I think we just have to say, as we always say, nothing on this show is considered financial advice. We always want you to do your own research, and we wish you nothing but the best on this journey.
Thanks, guys. And we'll see you at the next show.